Good morning, everybody, and welcome to The Artist's Well. This is your source for inspiration, insight, and connection with artists throughout Ireland and indeed beyond. Now, if you're watching this on YouTube, it would be great help if you could give it a like and subscribe, because by subscribing, it just helps to get more interest in the actual program and therefore reach out to more artists, which would be great. As I said, this is the 40th episode, and I'm delighted this morning to have with us our guest artist, Eamon Colman. Now, Eamon, in 2007, was elected a member of Aosdana in recognition for his outstanding contribution to the arts and culture in Ireland. And it's a great pleasure to have Eamon with us today. Eamon tends to divide his time between his garden and his studio, and is very much influenced, as I mentioned on the social media post, by his garden. So if you don't find him in the studio, he's likely to be in his garden. So let's go straight down to the outskirts of Kilkenny and say hi to Eamon. Good morning, Eamon.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
Delighted to be here, and welcome to my garden. A huge source of inspiration. When I moved in here first 17 years ago, none of this existed. So I literally, physically, by hand, this is a stream that passes through our land, which is the source of the River Dynam. And I physically, by hand, dug out this, I suppose, pond, which became a nursery bed for young trout in the river. They'd come up and nurse in the river. I've also done a whole series of planting. You have flag irises here, which are very beautiful, very, very magical. I also collect tulips. And these are tulips that I've literally grown from seed. I don't know if you can see them here.
Yes.
You can see the reds in them. They're already pink. They're a very beautiful color.
Mm-hmm.
And I collect tulips and have collected tulips for years. So they're a source of color inspiration for me in the garden. And here I have the yellow. This is a skunk cabbage just here.
Mm-hmm.
And it's again a very beautiful yellow.
Looks like a lily.
Smells awful, and it literally is what it says. These here are Fitiliari, snakehead Fitiliari.
Mm-hmm.
And I use them again. A lot of the splatters that you will see on my paintings come from the snakehead Fitiliari. So as you can see, look here. When I was coming home from the hospital one day, we passed by this very kitsch shop that sold metal. Flamencos. So so I couldn't resist. So I got 2 of them for the garden.
Lovely.
So yes, so here is my pond at Casa. It appears in quite a lot of my paintings over the years, and I'm just walking up. I'm showing you what it all looked like when we moved in. It's still a work in progress. So what it all looked like when we moved in, it was all, as you can see, completely overgrown. So it was all as wild as.
And how long are you living there, Eamon?
17 years now.
17 years, okay.
So the last 4 months, I suppose, cleared this patch here. So I'll extend the planting area all the way up to the boundary wall.
Yes.
This, unfortunately, is a forest owned by our neighbour, and it is quite on my pond because it soaks up so much water that, as you see, the pond is now quite low at the moment.
Yes. Yes.
I also grow a variety. These are very, you can see them. They're a variety of cowslip and of cow parsley. I collect these again in seed, and grow them all from seed. So this is a seed nursery bed for the cowslip and cow parsley, and they're all new, so they will come up as the summer goes on.
Yes, yes. And then your gate there is that separating your house from the garden or what?
Yeah, the gate separates. No, there is if you can see, there's a courtyard.
Ah, right, yes.
Where we can drive in the cars. I've got these are mature beech trees that are around the house, which, while I love them, they terrify me because every time there's a storm, I think, oh gosh, they're going to come down on top of the.
Yeah, and I gather some of them. Some of them have
the storm. So these are a variety of different cowslips that I have, and these cowslips are all wild cowslips from various parts of the world, native to various different parts of the world. But some of them are really beautiful. Can I show you that? Beautiful in color.
Yes, very buttery.
So you have that, and then you have these very dark.
Just a bit to the right there. Yeah.
Yeah. These very dark ones.
They're gorgeous, yeah.
So this is where my color inspiration comes from.
Yes.
I also have wallflowers, which again are all about my color inspiration. And this is where I get my I will walk back into the studio now.
Yeah, lovely. Okay.
Start just talking about. I'll show you these just before we go in. I'll show you these. These are beautiful, very late. I'm hoping to again. I have a couple of thousand narcissus in the garden. So these are very late narcissi.
Ah, yes.
Yeah, they are very late narcissi that I'm growing again. I've been nurturing them, so they will hopefully multiply, and I'll be able to put out hundreds of them in the next couple of years out into the garden. So it's always a work in progress, the garden.
Sure, yeah. And your studio is lovely. Give us a quick spin around there.
Yeah, I'm going to show you my studio. My studio was an old silage barn, which we converted probably 2 years after we came here. And it is a nice size. It's a lovely size studio. It has various different walls that I can work on, but it also, this series that I have up on the wall now is a series that I'm doing for 2 exhibitions. One is in the Dallas Museum of Biblical Studies or Biblical Art, and the other is in a Seskia Museum of Modern Art in LA. So there are 2 exhibitions that I'm working for, along with a solo exhibition in Source Art Center. So the Source Art Center will be in September.
Yeah.
So
and don't you have something on
these
at the moment?
Are all.
Sorry, Eamon. Don't you have something in Holland at the moment?
I have a show on in the Rubicon Gallery in Holland.
Yes.
Which is in Zutphen, which is just outside Amsterdam. And that opened during lockdown in Holland, and it's a showcase exhibition. So it has everything. It has my paintings, it has prints, and it has my scarves. I'm not wearing my scarf at the moment, but I make scarves as well.
Do you? All right. Okay.
So
I didn't know that.
it is. You have to do so many things as a full-time artist to keep the wolf from the door. So I do quite a lot. So
and to allow a bit of time for gardening as well.
Yeah, absolutely. But you can see, if I go up close, you can see these new works. These works are all on paper. I'm using Japanese rice paper, and a Japanese paper which is 50% plastic and 50% bamboo, called yopo. And yopo paper is wonderful to work on. And really, when I'm finished working on these, you the only way to tear them is to cut them with a saw, so they become as hard as timber.
Gosh,
with the amount of lamination that is on them.
But are they fairly flexible all the same? Are they?
Yeah,
Or is that rigid?
they become very no, they actually become quite stiff.
Do they? Yes. Okay.
So I usually frame them in perspex boxes to
Mhm.
show all the. If I can go in really close, you can see the tears and the marks and
Yes.
the
Yes.
bubble. You know, I'm gluing to it. I'm making the paper look as fragile as it possibly can,
Yeah.
while it's not fragile at all.
And what paint medium are you using in?
I'm using a paint called milk paint, which is an American paint, which is literally using the, I suppose, the after product of whey as its binder. And that it's the same paint that the Egyptians would have used to make the pyramids or build the pyramids.
Fascinating. And do you mix that yourself, or do you buy it?
I mix it myself. I will show you that later on. I have pure pigment, and I mix it with pure pigment. And then I do quite a lot. I was, before I got sick, I was artist in residence in water center down in Dingle.
Oh yeah.
The aquarium down in Dingle. And I do these drawings and prints. I print using another method of Japanese printing, where you actually build clay around the object that you're printing, and then ink it and then print it. So it's usually used with fish and with live animals that are dead animals that have just died, so that you get this flexibility in the making. So if you look closely at this, if you can see here, this is, I make an ink out of the guts of the squid.
Yes.
And then print with it.
All right.
So it's like a whole, I suppose, circular thing. You know, I have the dead squid in front of me. I'm using the squid ink and its guts to make the ink, and that becomes the painting. So I'm going to turn around now. The rest of my studio.
Yeah. Very spacious. Yeah, and good lighting. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, it was fun to build.
Yes. Eamon, since you alluded to it there, before we talk about, because I do want to talk about your childhood, which is very fascinating. You did allude to your health issues, and I know there are an awful lot of people who you know extremely well and are great fans of yours and fellow artists who'd be very anxious to know how you are now, because you've been through the mill. Are you happy to talk about it?
I'm recovering.
Yes.
3 years ago, I got diagnosed with esophageal cancer. And unfortunately, last March, I had to have my esophagus removed completely.
Yes.
Which during lockdown wasn't easy, because we had to come home to Kilkenny a week after I went into hospital.
Yes.
And we were, Pauline was thrown in at the deep end. My partner Pauline was thrown into the deep end to look after me. I've started to recover slowly but surely. I'm now doing a little bit of work in the garden again. And I did these series of paintings all during my illness, which I call the breakfast series, which were small. They're only 10 centimeters by 12 centimeters. Yes. Small little paintings. Yeah. And they kept me going.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I will always have challenges for the rest of my life now.
But you're in remarkably good voice. Your voice is very strong. I was just going to say, your voice is, considering.
Yeah, my voice is strong.
Your voice strong.
It can get weak at times, but I'm doing okay. You know. So
and eating is a challenge.
Eating will always be a challenge. I have no stomach anymore.
Yeah.
So what is my stomach is now just a long tube.
Yeah.
And that's quite small amounts, 20 times a day is how I eat. So I'm constantly hungry. You never can eat enough to quench your hunger, but you know, I'm alive. That's the main thing. They told me that I wouldn't be alive this long if I hadn't had the operation. So
Down in your attitude, you have a very positive attitude.
Yeah, no, I think these things either they change you and you work through them, or you become that grumpy old man who only talks about his illness all the time. And I'm not.
You're not
into being that person, you know,
no,
at all.
Absolutely not. I can tell.
So,
okay, let's go back to your childhood, because I mean, I think of all of the people I've spoken to, and you're number 40. I have never come across anybody who probably didn't have an option but to become an artist.
Yeah,
that's so. I mean,
yeah.
Tell us a little bit about your childhood, where you grew up.
My father was an artist.
Yeah.
My mother wrote a little bit.
Yeah.
And we grew up in a house where artists, conversation, everything happened. I mean, we had an extraordinary. I grew up with, I suppose, 4 of the very famous modernist Irish painters of the 50s and 60s and early 70s. Jerry Dillon, Arthur Armstrong, and George Campbell, and Nana Reid were all very important elements of my childhood. And then my dad showed with a gallery called the David Hendricks Gallery. And the David Hendricks Gallery was, at that stage, was probably, you know, one of the few galleries that was showing contemporary art. And there was the David Hendricks Gallery, and there was the Leo Smith's Gallery, which became the Dawson Gallery, which then became the Taylor Gallery.
Yeah.
They were the 2 galleries in Dublin. And I used to take most Thursdays off, unbeknown to my parents, and I would go and sit with David in his gallery. And David taught me more about painting than anything.
Yeah.
And that continued all during my school years. You know, George Campbell, Jerry Dillon, unfortunately died while I was quite young, but he was very important influencer on me, because I just adored his work and also adored him. He was an extraordinary man.
Yeah. And
George Campbell, it was quite a bohemian, wacky childhood.
It sounds, you know? And loads of parties and the likes.
Yeah, the parties were legendary.
Yeah.
There was a pub at the end of Talbot Street in Dublin. And afterwards people would adjourn to our house. And we had what was then really high technology at the time. We had a reel-to-reel tape recorder.
Yeah. And
they used to make little plays.
Yeah.
In the house. And I can remember one in particular where George Campbell was being interviewed by my father as the 1,000-year-old man. And in the middle of the interview, the 1,000-year-old man had to take a pee.
Yeah.
And I was sent out to the kitchen to get a pot and a jug of water, which was then very slowly poured in with lots of sighing and grunting as a 1,000-year-old man peed. It was just extraordinary. I mean, you grew up in this house full of that kind of merriment and mischief and fun.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Fantastic.
So then in 75, 76, in around that time, I walked into the David Hendricks Gallery and saw a Barry Cook exhibition from his trip to Borneo. And was just completely smitten. It was a very visceral, wonderful moment, because I realized, number one, here was a man who was speaking my language about nature and about the great outdoors, but also he was painting in a way that I suddenly felt, I can do that.
Yes.
And I left school in 76. And I started going to night classes. Unfortunately, couldn't afford to go at that stage, go to college full time. and I went to night classes in NCAD to do an educational degree.
Yes.
And started studying horticulture in botanical gardens in Dublin. Went on, I became the greenkeeper in Royal Dublin Golf Club, and was there for the Open, which was the Irish Open, which was a huge event at the time for the north side of Dublin. It was extraordinary. And that again enabled me to paint, because you were up and out at 6 a.m. to do your work, and I was finished probably at 2 p.m. So I'd come home and I'd set up a studio in one of the spare rooms in my parents' house, and I started working there.
Yes. And
from that I met Sean McSweeney, and Sean McSweeney really liked what I was doing and was very encouraging. And I was 19, 20 at the time. I mean, it was quite extraordinary to have an artist of his stature say, "Oh yeah, your work is interesting. You're working."
Absolutely. Yeah. Great
so
encouragement.
he got me an exhibition in the Rubicon Gallery in Blessington. And I worked for that. It was run by Carl Mullen, who was a gynecologist.
That's right. Yeah.
Who was an extraordinary champion of the arts. And I did 2 solo shows in the Tulfar's Gallery. And that gave me the courage to, number one, to travel. I went and traveled. And also just enabled me to make work and to actually feel that I could make a living doing this. So I gave up gameful employment, as he says, as such, and started working. And
where did you travel to, Eamon?
I traveled to after that first solo show, which was with Jared Davis. I traveled to Crete because I had been my parents had given me the Iliad of Homer when I was a very young child, and I fell in love. I fell in love with Greek mythology. So I went and traveled around Crete, worked as a shepherd in Crete, and really felt the color, the sun, that whole thing of the Mediterranean really suited what I was trying to do paint-wise.
Yes.
So it was quite.
Yeah. And where else did you venture?
Well, then I came back from there. I went over to Wales, spent quite a considerable amount of time walking in Wales and up Snowdonia and all around that whole area, and also again fell in love with trees through Wales. Wales is extraordinary for its oak and deciduous tree forests.
Yes.
So came back from Wales, and I worked for an exhibition with then Ciara McGonigal ran a gallery in Dublin, and I came back and worked for that in 1984, 82, 84, that sort of time. And that again was with a guy called Philip Blythe. It was a 2-person show. I was upstairs and he was downstairs.
Yes.
And that enabled me to then go back to Crete after that. I went back a second time and just literally wandered, drank too much wine, wandered around Crete, fell in love with it as an island. It's a stunningly beautiful place. And came back realizing that this was going to be my life. This is what I wanted to do. I wanted to work hard, make exhibitions, and then travel to other places.
Yes. I mean, it was inevitable, of course, that you'd become an artist. But did you have any other leanings or thoughts about what you might have been had you not become an artist?
Gardening was the only other thing I always say the reason why I'm a gardener and an artist is I'm not very good at anything else. And that's probably the truth of it, really.
Yeah.
Even though in 1984, I became involved in art politics and joined the Artists Association of Ireland, who went on to become its vice chair first. Myself and another artist called Stephen Rothschild, he was the chairman and I was the vice chair. We kind of steered the Art Association to become more of a representative body for the arts. And then when Stephen retired, I very nicely got voted as chairperson and got quite involved. At that time, Temple Bar was just being built.
Yes, yes.
They were just changing. So I got quite involved in representing the artist's voice in Temple Bar, creating what we called cultural licenses for artists to enable them to stay in Temple Bar and work, because there were quite a lot of, because it was such cheap rent in Temple Bar, it was very, very easy, you know, to rent there and stay there.
Sure.
And people were living and working in Temple Bar at
and I
the
mean,
time.
and that's become a great success, hasn't it? I mean,
It's
really
huge.
is a catalyst for
It's
art,
amazing. I mean, unfortunately, it probably doesn't have as many artists as I would have liked living there. I think that at the beginning it was quite there was a real cutting edge sense to what was happening in Temple Bar.
Yes.
Artists were it was a whole new generation of artists who were finding studios there and creating. Mick Cullen was there, Nick Miller. There was quite a few, Etna Jordan. You know, there was quite a few well-known artists within the area. And as Temple Bar got developed, they moved up to Henrietta Street, and Henrietta Street became the new hub, of which I then moved to. After in 1988, I moved into to Henrietta Street, which was amazing.
And was that just a sort of a self-contained building that had a number of studios for different artists?
Unshin McCone was an architect in Dublin who won the sweeps in 1960s, and he bought a lot of Georgian Dublin, and he was a real champion of the arts. He just gave us. I had my flat and my studio for £19 a week in 1988. I mean, you know, it was extraordinary. It was at a time when flats were starting to get really expensive in Dublin. He realized that artists couldn't afford to live in that kind of. So I lived. Una Seeley was there. There was Aileen McKeown. There were quite a few well-known artists in Henrietta Street at the time, and then I lived there for a while, and next door to me was Mick Cullen, Etna Jordan, Mick O'Dea, Daniel McKeown. There were quite a few, really. So it was a great buzz.
There must have been.
For a better word.
Yeah, there must have been.
Place, you know?
Yeah. And then how did your career develop after that?
Well, amazingly, in 85, I won a residency to Anna McCarrick. And I won it for 3 weeks. And so I went up to Anna McCarrick, had this extraordinary experience of the first night I was in Anna McCarrick. You sit down at this social table in the evening time where all the residents come. And I sat down. On one side of me was Seamus Heaney, and the other side was Michael Longley. Two, you know, at this time they were the stars of Irish writing.
Yes.
And they were both struggling to write. And they were coming down in the morning saying, I haven't been able to write anything today. It's terrible, you know. So I realized that when you're at a certain stage, nothing flows. You have to still work at the process of making something. So that was an extraordinary experience. And on my last night in Anna McCarrick, I was due to go down and spend a 2-week, I suppose, holiday cutting rhododendrons out of the National Forest down in Killarney. And I said this at the table, this is what I was doing.
Mm.
And afterwards, we went to this very famous pub in Annaghmakerrig called the Black Kesh, and which everybody walked to at night. And we were all walking up to the pub, and Bernard came to me and said, I'm offering you a job. You can come and stay here, help work in the gardens. I'll give you studio space, and you can eat at the main table every night, which I did for the next 3 years.
Did you really?
And I would say that was my college away from college.
Yeah.
I learned more in Annaghmakerrig about painting, about poetry, about the cultural life, I suppose, in general. I met people like June Levine, Dermot Seymour, Alice Marr. There was a whole platter of artists, Michael Harding, Dermot Healy. Dermot Healy and myself became really close friends.
Yes.
So, and Oliver Colm Tobin, again, another friend. And these people stayed friends for the rest of, we're still friends to this day.
And of course, they were all turning over all the time. You were there for 3 years. They were turning over every two weeks or so.
I became like the errand boy that would carry up the bags up to the room and introduce everybody. And everybody was very scared of Annaghmakerrig at first, because it was supposed to be haunted and it had all of that reputation. So I was the one that I would either spend the night stirring the pot, telling stories about the ghosts in the place, or I'd try and calm everybody down. So it was quite a wonderful experience.
Yes, it sounds.
And Mary and Bernard Loughlin, who ran it, were exceptional. I mean, totally. Bernard was one. I would say Bernard gave me more security as an artist than any other person I'd ever met.
Yeah.
And he encouraged me to put in work for Eva International in 1988. And I did. I put in this huge big pastel drawing on paper, and I won it.
Did you?
And to win Eva at the time was huge, because it was £1,000 first prize, which in '88 was enormous.
A lot of money.
And that enabled me to go afterwards. June Levine introduced me to the Calcutta Artists Union in India. And I went and did a residency with the Calcutta Artists Union in India, and spent some time traveling around India, going to the Ganges, seeing that color and loved it. Loved the whole, the passion of the place.
Sure. Yes.
So I came back to do a show in the then Kieran McGonigal Gallery, which was in off South Anne Street in Dublin. And unfortunately, the gallery closed. And there was another young artist up in Annaghmakerrig at the time called Margaret McNamee. And Margaret McNamee introduced me to Eve Linders, who then ran the Eve Linders Gallery in Mount Street. And I did my first show with her.
Yes.
And that then went on to become the Rubicon Gallery. And I showed with the Rubicon then for 15 years, thereabouts.
Yes.
And that was a very exciting time, because it was quite a, we had amazing parties after the exhibitions, and artists were very supportive of each other in the gallery.
Yeah. And
so we'd all turn up to each other's exhibitions and then hit the pub and dance on the tables afterwards.
Wonderful, as you do.
It was just great. I have this great story about having a show. I did a solo show from India in the early 90s. And there was an amazing restaurant in Dublin called 101. And I had booked it for afterwards. So we had this huge, half the restaurant full of people. And I ordered sambuki for everybody at the table.
The start?
And I don't, the flame that is on
the yeah.
Well, apparently, if you put your hand over it and snuff it,
Yeah.
it's supposed to be an amazing. I put my hand over the sambuki and my hand stuck to the glass completely.
Yeah.
So I spent the night on the table, on a chair, on the top of the table with my hand in a bucket of ice, singing to my heart's content. And that was the sort of, they were the sort of nights that were had in the Rubicon in those early days. It was just wonderful.
Wonderful memories. Wonderful memories.
Great.
Yeah.
You know,
I love it.
it was great.
Listen, shall we go on and look at some of your work, or are there a few other areas we should talk about before we do that?
No, perfect.
Yeah. Okay, let's do that. Okay, Eamon, you just carry on and let me know when you want me to move on.
Okay. So this is a painting that is now in the collection of Irish Life. And I spent a lot of time walking and doing quite serious, long weekend walks in Wicklow. And one of the things that shocked me about Wicklow was that they were cutting down a lot of the very mature trees in Wicklow at the time. So this is the paint section is all oil, and the blue section is pigment, is pure pigment. And the idea is that will fall off over the years and leave these white gaps in like the ghost of the trees.
Yeah.
So this was the painting that I started using pure pigment and started developing a new methodology, if you like, of making work, or method of making work. So you can move on now.
Okay, and hence the title, And Now a Feather.
And now a feather gently falls.
Yeah.
Then in the Rubicon again, the late 90s, I had done a lot of traveling. Pauline and myself were together. We were walking and traveling Wales, England, Ireland, and I painted these series of paintings on aluminium. And the show was called "We Walk Like This Because We Walk Like That," and it was about, I suppose, the act of, which I've kind of returned to in this recent work, the act of, as you're walking, your landscape changes, your perspective changes as you walk through the landscape. Again, using, a dandelion, a bluebell might pick up a color that would inform the painting as I was going along.
Yes.
So we can move on to the next slide. This is from a recent show. I just moved. I've been showing with the Hillsborough Fine Art for the last 13 years. And I moved about 3 years ago to the Solomon Gallery in Dublin. Yeah. And the Solomon has been an amazing experience, a genuinely amazing experience. And I made this series of paintings as I became aware that I was ill. I also became aware of, I suppose, the earth's, landscape's fragility. And I started painting these paintings on paper using pure pigment, but also started, if you look at that kind of gray in the right-hand side of the slide, that's archival tracing paper glued on over what was painted underneath as a way of masking stuff. And I was trying to show when you see these paintings, they're painted in Perspex boxes. These are actually oils on very heavy duty paper.
What sort of size would they be, Eamon?
That's about 4 foot by 5, I suppose.
Yeah. Okay, so
it's quite a big piece.
Yeah.
What I started doing was all of the French ultramarine blues there are mixed, and I'll talk about it later. It's just nomenclature book, which is a book that Darwin brought with him on the Beagle.
Yeah, can you show us that?
It's a recipe book of colors, and I started using these recipes to make new color.
Yeah.
And that's what you're seeing in this.
Can you just show us that book, Eamon? You have it there.
Oh yeah, I can.
Yeah, just put it up to
it's
camera. It's a fascinating book.
Can you see that?
Yeah, just about. Yeah. That's better. Yeah.
It is. I'll talk about it a little before we finish up. I'll go through it a little bit.
Okay.
So I started using those pure pigments and mixing them directly onto the surface of the painting. So you get this kind of powdery fragility to the paintings. Now we can move on to the next one. I've purposely, in giving you the slides, I've jumped around from era to era because I felt that would feel more natural.
Okay.
So this is a painting I did I started showing in a gallery called the Queen's Hall Gallery in Narberth in Wales. And these are a series of paintings again on aluminium that I did. And again, they're based on, I suppose, collapsed structures within a landscape, abandoned structures within a landscape. And I started using, there's newsprint stuck onto the aluminium. There is paper stuck onto the aluminium and torn back. I started, which has become my go-to tool as a painter, is a sander. And I sand everything back to try and get that sense of, so I started really abusing the surface that I'm working on in the right sense of the word, if you like.
Yes.
You know, I started sanding it, scraping it, pushing the surface to, I suppose, enable me talk about what I was really interested in, and it is the effects of climate change on our landscape today. I'm trying to show how landscape isn't pretty, and we have tended to have this kind of, I suppose, 19th century model of painting. So what I do is on working on the aluminium, I just got a question up. On working on the aluminium, I polish it first. Then I prime it with rabbit skin glue, sand it back, and create a bite that way, and then add my painted surface to it. So it is, and these are very slow paintings. They're not, these paintings will take me 2-3 years to paint.
Wow, yeah.
So they're very slow. And what I try to do is make the paintings look as if they're very spontaneous, but the reality is that they're not. I do lots of drawing and I suppose balance placement. You know, I'll try and get the balance in a painting to work and how I feel it works. So we can move on to the next slide now. This is a painting from the Hillsborough Fine Art. Just after we moved down here to Kilkenny, I had an exhibition in the Hillsborough with John Daly, who, again, this was a wonderful experience. What was extraordinary about it, but John was in the same gallery space that Ciara McGonigal had been in all those years earlier. So I was returning to a space that I knew. And one of the things that is amazing here, in late autumn, early September, we get these white moths, hundreds of them flying in, and they're migratory moths. So this is the gypsy, I call them gypsy moths because of that sense of, I don't know really what their actual title is, but I like the idea of the gypsy moth. So this is oil on canvas. Again, I'm using dry pigment, sanding it back, I suppose distorting the paint as much as I possibly can without killing the color on it. And mixing up. I would spend months working on a painting trying to get those browns and reds and greens that are happening in there.
Yes.
You know, so yeah. So we can move on to the next one. This is a very large, I did a painting in St. Louis, in the Cecil Hunt Museum in St. Louis in 2007, I think. And this is a very large painting. It's about 10 foot long by about 8 foot high.
Yeah.
And it's called Under the Wings of a Heron, or something similar,
Yeah.
if I can remember.
Under a heron with.
Yeah, Under a Heron's Wings.
Yeah.
And again, what I was trying to do, I was looking at the old masters and quite a lot of the layering, especially in those mid-Renaissance religious paintings where you would get the dark blues glazed over a lighter blue to create these very luminous colors. So I started glazing for this exhibition. I started glazing the work quite slowly, building it up, very thin layers of paint, one on top of the other. This painting again comes from the pond that you've just seen, and we get a visit, especially in March when the frogs come down to spawn. We get a visit from a heron, and it's been the same heron because he's got particular marks on it for the last 5 years. They probably lived for about 5 years. So I'm just fascinated by that link between something that I have created and the reflectiveness of what happens, that otherworldliness, if you like, of what happens when you sit and spend time looking at it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, this is Pauline and myself went and we walked through the Cederberg Mountains in South Africa. We did it twice. We did it before Ruben was born, and then when Ruben was about 10 months old, we went back. And I fell in love with South Africa. It is the most beautiful place, beautiful people, extraordinary landscapes, and extraordinary tales and the stories. So they have this whole thing where the Zulu people would bring their grandparents who were ill up to a tree and prop them up against the tree to allow them to die against what they called grandfather trees. So and I love that idea of, your time is up, you're sat down looking over the landscape that you've known all your life, and you slowly but surely become part of that landscape. And that's what this whole series of paintings was about. It was about depicting those, I suppose, the link between what I was looking at and the stories I was hearing.
Yes. So
we can move on to the next slide. This is a painting that I did. I did a show for the Vanguard Gallery down in Cork, and I really love walking at night. Walking at night is one of the special moments for me because nobody's around, you can't be seen, and in fact there is a whole other world and nocturnal life out there. So this was again a very slow painting. It's work on canvas. It was painted in stages of building up those Prussian blues with greens and browns underneath it to create that luminosity. Yes. And it didn't work as a painting. It just couldn't work at all. And then one day I came into the studio and I rubbed white pigment into the top section of it. And suddenly the painting worked. And very often that's what happens for me. You can work for years on a painting and it hasn't got that wow moment for me. And I very rarely will I release a painting unless it has that wow moment for me. And suddenly rubbing that 10 minutes of doing that, suddenly the painting came together as an entity. Yes.
And it's called In the Harsh Moonlight.
Yeah. And so this was an exhibition I did for Rua Red in Tala. Mm-hmm. And here we have some the sheds around the house were built in 1710, and they're stone sheds, stone, I suppose, milking parlors And there is one shed that still has a beam in it that was used for making butter. And I discovered a willy wagtail had nested in one of the outsheds, and was making a journey between one outshed to the next in this kind of crazy, I presume, to scare off people or confuse prey about where its nest actually was.
Yes.
And I just loved I would watch the kind of pattern. Oh, sorry, I never plugged in my.
Okay.
Are we back?
You're back. You're back. Yeah.
Yeah. We're back.
Okay.
So this is a very abstract piece about that flight of the willy wagtail, basically. And what is extraordinary about these series of paintings is I started using grey for the first time. Mm-hmm. And grey has become a very important counterfoil, I suppose, to my colour. I sometimes feel with my paintings that I'm over reliant on colour. So I now use quite a, I play with tonal greys in order to counterbalance that colour.
Yes.
So we can move on to the next slide.
Mm-hmm.
This is again another painting from the Vanguard series, but this is an important painting for me in that when I was a child, we would go down on George Campbell's insistence. We went down to Roundstone in Connemara, and myself and Suzanne, my sister, we would go down and spend the month of August and sometimes July and August down in Roundstone every year. And we were, at that stage, Inishlacken was an island off the coast of Roundstone, was completely uninhabited, but a guy called Michael Woods still owned a ruined cottage on the island. And we would go over and spend time on Inishlacken. And this is a painting from memory of that time in Inishlacken. And that I was using in this, I'm using Indian yellow, and that is a color that is found on the island quite a lot when you look at the bracken and the grasses as they're washed out towards August.
Yes.
So this is just called Inishlacken.
Yeah.
This is again from a show I did in Vienna, in a commercial gallery in Vienna, and it was based on a trip that we made to Wales, where we went around Wales, and we again, this is me treating, it's on aluminium again, and this one is particularly abused in that what I did was I didn't use, there's no brushes being used in this painting at all. It's all done with my hand. And I have ground up the pink pigments myself and make them into a very fine powder. I then pour linseed oil onto the surface so it's painted on the flat, and then rub in the color into it. So and that Naples yellow on the side is again ground pigment. Just
do you varnish it? Do you varnish it to protect that?
I varnish it with a non-reflective varnish, but it gets I spray it with a fixative.
Okay.
For pollute myself for months as I'm spraying it, to try and fix it. So
yeah.
But what's interesting in this is all of the underpainting in that is rabbit skin glue. So I've raised the rabbit skin glue off the surface and allowed that to. Somebody is asking, I hope I protect myself? Probably the reason why I got esophageal cancer is that I never protected myself from the the materials that I was using in the studio.
Yes, yes.
I would rub in the pigments with my raw hands. I wouldn't put gloves on. I would rub it in with my raw hands.
Yeah.
So obviously it wasn't very healthy, but I still find it very hard to wear gloves and paint, because I need to feel the texture of the paint as I'm putting it on. I need to feel it quite strong.
Yes. So that was called Maeve's Tree on the Hill of Pain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Based on the hill of Slievenamon and that whole area of Slievenamon.
Yes, yes.
This is another painting that was painted under perspex. The black that you see in this is black that I've made myself from soot, and I've mixed it with linseed oil and poppy oil to get that tonal quality that is happening in the paint.
Yes.
The other thing that I did with this was that all the underpainting is actually flat color painted underneath, and then I've put on Yopo paper, and I tear it. So I tear it back to let the underpaint come through. Oh. And that's where you see, if you look at the center of that, all of those little purples and blues that are coming through. Mm-hmm. It's all torn paint. Okay. This is part of that whole series that I did for the Rubicon Gallery. It was, I suppose, that whole thing of being, again, I'm very, very involved in trying to depict climate change and how climate change is affecting our landscape. Yes. This is again from another series of paintings I did for the Vanguard Gallery in Cork, and this is from an exhibition which was called Between the Bog and the Hard Place. Mm. And down here, there's an extraordinary little hamlet of houses in the forest down here, which is now a Quilcha forest, which is down here. And the hamlet had been occupied by a man, his wife, and his 7 kids. And every time his kids got married, he built another house for them on the land. So you suddenly had a kind of a village of a family homestead. Yes. And in 1922, a man from the area who was incredibly jealous of this particular guy because he had married what was the girl he loved in the, I suppose, in around 1915. And in 1922, he turned around to the local IRA and said this guy was an informer, and he was taken up to the crossroads and shot. On his deathbed, he then informed the family that it had all been a lie and that he was only jealous of this guy. And that family abandoned that homestead and moved to Canada. And I just found that story incredible, the whole notion that there had been this whole family life, this family existence, and now the Quilcha forest that is beside us was on is on a raised bog. Mm-hmm. And they've ruined what was a raised bog by planting conifers on it. Yeah. But these houses still exist. Do they? And if you sit in them, you can hear children, you can feel them, you can feel that whole sense of abandoned beauty, I suppose, for want of a better word. I won Eva with this painting. Yes. And I became very, I suppose, through talking with Bernard Loughlin and Mary Loughlin, I became very interested in the environment and what was happening in the environment. So on a holiday from Annaghmacarrick, I went and I walked around Sellafield and took my holiday to Sellafield. And these are a depiction of those towers at Sellafield, yes, which were belching this white, steamy, obviously pollution, but I don't know what was in the steam coming out. And I likened them to Orpheus and the underworld. Yeah. These kind of entrances into the underworld. And what is interesting about this painting is that I'm still using some of the same techniques today, in that there is, you know, that bluey purple section is glued on. It's a glued on piece of canvas, glued on. And I was starting to play around with the non-traditional use of materials. So there is oil paint, there is pastels, there's acrylic, there's egg tempera. Everything you could possibly imagine was used in this painting, and it's quite a large painting. It's about 10 foot square.
Is it?
So it was quite a large piece, and I was very fortunate to went to Eve, and the guy who was selecting was a Danish curator at the time, and he gave me the first prize, which was wonderful. Yeah. Great experience.
Absolutely, yeah. And Eamon, we're going to run through the next lot quite quickly, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, that's fine.
Because I'm very anxious to get onto the Q&A.
Yeah.
And there's about 5. Well, there's about 10 left, maybe less.
Okay, this is just part of the Ruhr Red show, and this is just me letting you use those pinky greys again and play with that. Yeah, you can move on.
Yeah.
This is again from this is called Soul Tree. This is from the Vanguard Gallery, and the yellow oils on the right hand side is very thick and very luscious. So
yes.
Yeah. This is from Africa. This is Sunday's river from Africa, where we went and hiked with Ruben as a 10-month-old. We hiked up the Sunday's River, Pauline and myself.
Yeah.
And it's an extraordinarily beautiful place. This is again part of that Soul Tree series.
The Waltzing
just
Wind.
using paint as a layering, as a I suppose, you know, creating that depth of color through layering it.
Okay.
These are very large paintings that I did for America, for another show in America, and this is called
Northern Ireland.
Yeah,
Northern
there
Ireland.
is an where baffled pigeons. I can't remember the full title, but it's about trees being cut down basically, and pigeons having nowhere to land.
Yeah.
So we can move on. This is a painting I did for the Hillsborough Fine Art in Dublin, and these were a whole series of walks around here. I started then painting within a 30 kilometers radius of where I live.
Yes. So is that quite recent?
That's recent enough. That's probably 2015.
All right. Okay. Yes. Yeah. Okay.
Again, this is from the Rubicon Gallery, and this is the title painting. This is We Walk Like This because we walk like that.
Yeah. Yes.
So it's and that's on aluminium.
And this is the last one.
A painting that I was very honoured. Derek Cully, who's with us today. Hello, Derek. Yes. Yep. Derek selected me to show in an exhibition that was in Spain called Celtic Vision. And this is where the screech owl sings. And it's a really nice sized canvas, but it's a canvas piece that I was very lucky featured on the front cover of the Irish Arts Review recently enough, 2010 or thereabouts.
Yes. Lovely. Okay, that's it. Let me stop sharing there. That was tremendous. Thank you very much. I know there are loads of people who want to get in here. So if anybody wants to ask a question person, please go to the raise hand button and let me know, and then I'll unmute you. Otherwise, you'll be muted, okay? You can probably see these as well. Paul Murray, I'm working backwards, okay? I was working backwards. All right. Wow, yeah, Paul Murray says, wow, incredibly inspiring work. And I could listen to you talk all day. Thanks, Eamon and Alan. Derbil says, absolutely wonderful art, Eamon. So inspiring in every way. Marianne, that was great. Thanks, Eamon and Alan. Working back. Bridget Flannery, apologies, Eamon and Alan. I must leave. Physio on tricky foot. Great to see you, Eamon. Enjoy the times, everyone. Bridget. Marilyn, absolutely fascinating to hear these stories. Jacinta O'Reilly, so inspiring to see your interesting abstract work, and your use of color is so inspiring. Thanks so much for sharing. Take good care, Jacinta. Melanie says, beautiful light and color. Yvonne Maloney says, I hope you protect yourself when using pigment powder. Yeah, well, indeed, we did discuss that. Alico says, absolutely stunning colors. They are, aren't they? Claire Daly, fond memories of the Rua Red exhibition opening night. So she remembers that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jean, love the night painting. Angela, the colors of the night painting are fabulous. David Goldberg, the cedar bergs are nice, but the Drakensbergs are even greater. You may understand that. I don't understand that. iPhone to everyone says, absolutely love this heron. Fascinating. What a great insight. Such a Saturday morning treat. Thank you. Derek says, Cecil Hunt Museum, a major world-class work. Derek. Sorry, this could well have been in relation to a particular painting we were looking at.
Yeah. No, I'd say it was the big piece.
Yes, probably. Yeah.
That show that I did in America was all of very large paintings.
Yes.
And they were all painted with pure pigment onto the canvases.
Yes.
And they were inspired by the changing landscape around us here.
Yes.
So quite a
wonderful. Eileen McDermott Rowe says, love the gypsy moth paintings as I do. Eileen, beautiful. You are a great storyteller as well as a great artist and gardener. Many thanks for a wonderful talk this morning. That's from Eileen. Claire Daly, fabulous to see your work, Eamon, and to hear you talking about your inspiration from nature and place. Colette Grant, your colours are so vibrant. Purples, blues, greens. Owen McLaughlin says, the joy of colour, exclamation mark. And Rebecca says, inspiring talk. Well done, Eamon. 1991 ice exhibition during Dublin's European City of Culture show in RHA. You guided my first painting exposure to Irish life. That's from Rebecca. Catherine Gagan says, do you prime aluminium first? Do you prime your aluminium?
Yes, it has to be primed. It has to be, I polish it first. There's a protective layer on aluminium first. I take that off and then I sand it. And then I will prime it with rabbit skin glue first.
Yes.
And then I put gesso. But I put about 40 layers of gesso on it.
Do you?
And I sand each layer back so that it's quite a powdery surface when you work on it.
Yes. Yes.
So,
I can see how
it's a lovely surface to work on, but it takes a lot of work to get it to be a lovely surface to work on.
Olivier Cornet says, thanks for mentioning all these galleries that have played a part in your wonderful career, Eamon. Love your work, Olivier.
Well, without the galleries, one couldn't have a career,
Yes. Owen McLaughlin says, amazing story of your life, especially about Anna McCarrick. Now, I'm going to miss some people. Forgive me if I do, because there's 8 new messages below, so I think I should go to them too. Fiona, oh, sorry. Where do you source your pigments, Eamon?
I source my pigments in London.
Yeah.
I was doing it in New York, and unfortunately the New York gallery closed, or the New York shop closed.
Yeah.
And I now get it in London.
Okay. Paul also says, how many paintings do you usually work at a time?
Well, I suppose, if you look at my wall behind me, if I can move the camera, you can. There are probably about 50 paintings on that wall.
Must be, yeah.
But I've been working on them over the last 5 years.
Yes. Yeah.
So they would, they get put away. So I have work that I've been working on the last 5 years put away, and then it gets taken out at some stage when I'm starting to feel that I'm starting to do it. So yeah, I'll work on about 10 or 15 paintings over a period of time at any one time.
Do you put them on the wall? Do you mount them on the wall?
I always leave them up because I find paintings. My job as a painter, for me, my job is that I will have an individual conversation with the painting.
Yeah.
And then when I put them together, they must have a conversation with each other.
Yes.
So I try to get them talking to each other.
Mm-hmm.
I think I was very influenced by comic books when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
So I tend to work in a series of, 10, 12 paintings at a time.
Mm-hmm.
And I know where they're going. Now I'm lucky in that I know that I'm having exhibitions,
yes,
a couple of years from now. So I will be working for an exhibition a couple of years from now on those paintings. And I'm working on the Rue Red or the source ones now. So they've come out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're up and they're starting to have a conversation with each other. And that's the
Jen Donnery says, Eamon, do you use sketchbooks as part of your process?
Yes, I use sketchbooks all the time.
And photographs?
Drawing for me is an integral part of what I do. Yeah. But I don't draw realistically anymore. I used to, but I don't anymore. What I'm trying to do is find, for every one painting, I probably do about 100 drawings to try and get the balance within the painting properly. So I come up with a shape and then I move it around the canvas. So I tend to make the paper that I'm using, the sketchbook paper, the same size as the canvas that I'm working on.
Yes.
And that even goes when I'm working on something big.
Yeah.
I will glue paper together to make the same size shape and then try and get a balance.
Yeah.
Try and see. And also test colors one beside the other, make sure that they aren't cancelling each other out, or there is no color that is so dominant that you can't read the rest of the painting. I always believe that an abstract painting has to have a quiet moment in it, somewhere for the eyes to rest before you can move it on. Okay.
We have loads and loads of questions that I don't think we're going to be able to get to be honest with you. So my apologies to those who've put messages in. If you want, I'm going to be putting on the YouTube channel, I'll be putting your details, your contact details on your website and your galleries, the galleries that you're showing with. I'll put all that up. So if people have individual questions, they could contact.
Well, also you can put EamonColemanStudio.com if people want to email me questions. Delighted to answer them.
Sure.
So it's Eamon Coleman Studio
at Gmail.
At gmail.com. So you can put that up as well.
Okay. And I'll put that up on my social media as well.
I will talk. Will I talk a little bit about this?
Do absolutely. And then I have one more question before we finish. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Just because I just saw a question came up on this.
This
is the nomenclature of colours, and it's adapted for zoology, biology, chemistry, mineralogy, atomy, and the arts by P. Sims. It was first published in 1814 as part of the Darwin expedition. And what is interesting about it is, I'll show you now. You can see, if I can show you, it's got recipes.
A little more, yeah.
For color.
Yes, that's good.
I will look at these colors so I can get a pretty accurate color, and then go to the next page and play with the recipe. It has things like gallstone yellow. is gambo yellow with a small quantity of Dutch orange and a minute portion of honey yellow. So I will try and mix that up to as near that color as I possibly can.
Yeah.
And after every exhibition, I will spend about 6 months just purely mixing color, because for me, color are like the words in the sentence for me to get through. So
is that book readily available?
Yeah, I bought this in the British Museum it was the British Museum Natural History.
Yeah.
And it's by Patrick Sims, S-Y-M-E, Sim. Mm-hmm. And he was a flower painter from Edinburgh. Yeah. And he developed the recipes that Darwin was using on his, and the recipes themselves, the colors themselves. I mean, you have here in the blue, one of the blues is a Prussian blue, beauty spot on the wing of a mallard duck. Yes. So everything in it
relates back,
exactly related back to an animal or a plant or some organic
bird. Yeah. It's one that sounds absolutely fabulous. That
it's a book that I recommend everybody should try and get.
So
absolutely. If people, I'll put up a post with it, and I'll show its IBN number and all of that. So
do please. Now, one of the questions I ask all the artists who come on the Artist Well is this question, and that is that if you were to be allowed to beg, borrow, or steal any work of art in the world from any period of time in order to adorn your wall at home so that you could look at it day and night, what would it be and why?
It would have to be Howard Hotchkiss. Howard Hotchkiss, for me, is one of the most extraordinary painters that has painted in Britain. What I love about this painting is it's both, again, it tells a story, but also it is very minimalist in its approach, in that he's using birch ply as the hang, and then he has only sized the area where the brush strokes are going to be, and has literally, with a deft flick of the wrist. And this was an 80-year-old man who made this painting, which I think is quite extraordinary. What's interesting about Howard Hotchkiss is that he told abstract stories with his abstract paintings, and he talked about a night in Honolulu, and he would try and give an impression of what was happening on that night.
Yes. Simply
through a few flicks of paint. He also painted his frame, which is quite interesting. He painted the paintings moved out; they morphed outside of the canvas and onto the frame.
Yes, fantastic.
And his paintings, most of his paintings are quite small.
Are they? Yeah.
So I would love to. Yeah, I'd love to own a Howard.
Where is it at the moment? We'll arrange a heist.
They have the Tate have them.
Oh yes.
He's probably in every major contemporary art collection in Britain and Europe, especially. He only died recently.
Did he?
Yeah. A year ago, maybe 2 years ago at the most.
Oh.
But there is an amazing catalogue of his work of Howard Hotchkiss' last paintings.
Yes.
And they are unbelievably powerful. Here was a man who knew he was dying, who was still being very optimistic and life enhancing as he made these paintings. And I as a person and as an artist, I really admire that in a human being.
Sure. Yeah. Eamon, that was just inspirational. Absolutely inspirational. And on behalf of everyone who's watching and those who will be watching on the YouTube channel, and there will be many, many more. And I think we hit a record today as well, nearly under 100, and we can't take more than 100 on the live program. So look, thank you so much on behalf of everybody for the time and effort you put into this. And it's just been an extraordinary adventure chatting to you and spending time with you during the week to arrange this. And thank you so much.
Well, hopefully we'll be able to meet up in the real world.
In the real world, I certainly
maybe
hope
the arts club for I could have 1 pint, so that's my limit these days. So
yes,
that'd be great.
Okay.
So I can sit in.
Yeah, we'll definitely do that. Yeah. So listen, thank you again, and thank you everybody for watching. Hope you enjoyed it, and don't forget, give it a thumbs up and a subscribe if you're watching this on the YouTube channel. Now next week we have yet another artist, and she lives in somewhere around Carlow, I think it is. And so we'll be zooming down to her next Saturday, same time, 10 o'clock. And she will be made known as usual on Wednesday morning through my social media. So look out for that. So other than that, it remains for me to just say goodbye. Thank you all again. Look after yourself and look after each other. And I look forward to seeing you next Saturday. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
And thank you. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Bye, Emily. Bye-bye.
Well done. Thank you. Bye.